Hey guys, that's me Vikas Ahmed and welcome to the series of the pharmacology, and today we are discussing about the pharmacodynamics. What is the pharmacodynamics? So the pharmacodynamics is the study of biochemical and physiological effect of the drug on the body and their mechanism of action. So what the body does to the drug, it means that is pharmacokinetics, and what the drug does to the body, that is the pharmacodynamics. So what is the importance? It explains what the drug does to the body, and also what help in understanding the therapeutic effect, adverse effect, and the drug interaction, and also necessary for the rational drug selection and the safe use of the drug. And its scope is to study the drug receptor interaction, mechanism of the action, and relationship between the drug concentration and effect, and factor modifying the drug response. These are the main scopes. So the first thing, what we have discussed, that the pharmacodynamic is the study of the drug on the body. When it enters the body, what it does with the body. So the next thing is the drug receptor. When drug enter into the body, it act on any kind of the receptor which receive it, and then a response is generated. Cellular response is generated. What should be the characteristics of the receptor? It should be highly specific for the drug, stereospecific, saturable, and high affinity. These are the main characteristics. And the next thing is property. So number of the receptor should be limited, and location, it should be outside the surface of the receptor, surface of the membrane, or inside the membrane. And it should be coupled, it should be ion channel, it should be enzyme or the gene, and reserve. And the receptors which are present should also be in reserve form, in the spare form, which can be used later. So how the receptor work actually? The receptor have regulations, up regulation and down regulation. Mean when the number of receptor increase and its sensitivity increase, it mean that is upregulated receptors like the beta receptors and the heart failure. These are upregulated. And when the decreased number of receptor will decrease in the sensitivity, this will be the down regulation receptors, like the long-term opioid use. When you use much opioid for a long time, the receptor will be desensitized and the response will be less than the normal response. What are the spare receptors? These are a condition in which the maximum response can be produced by less than 100% receptors, and the receptor which remain are known as spare receptors. And what is affinity? The tendency of the drug to bind on the receptor is known as its affinity. Next thing is efficacy. And efficacy is intrinsic activity or ability of the drug receptor complex to produce a biological response, mean how much a response can be generated by a receptor. When efficacy is high, then the Emax, mean the maximum response will be high. The next thing which we are going to study is the type of the receptors. So there are four major type of the receptors. First is ligand gated ion channels. These second is G protein couple receptor. Third is enzyme linked receptor, and four is intracellular nuclear receptor. We are going to study the first ligand gated ion channel, and the mechanism of ligand gated ion channel is simple. There are present the ion channels in the membrane, like that the sodium and potassium ion channel, and when the drug bind to them, they open or close these channels, and moving of the ion outside or inside the membrane. When ion flow outside or inside the membrane, they will activate or deactivate the system. And examples like the acetylcholine receptor, GABA receptor, glycine receptor, and the serotonin receptors are the main. The next thing is drug acting. Drug acting, succinyl is the drug, succinylcholine, which can act on the acetylcholine receptor, and diazepam act on the GABA receptor, and ondansetron, which act on the uh, histamine receptors. They have very short, very I can say that they have very sharp effect. And the next thing is the G protein couple receptor. G protein couple receptors, and they have seven. They are also called as seven pass receptors. And when the ligand bind to them, they activate the G protein and affect the enzyme which activates the secondary messenger, and that produce the effect, like the beta adrenergic muscarinic receptors, dopamine receptors, and histamine, adrenaline, and beta agonist, and atropine, salbutamol, and metoclopramine effect on the they are also rapid receptors. Third type is enzyme linked receptors. Enzyme linked receptors mean when the drug bind, they will activate the enzymes like the phosphokinases, and these enzymes will generate the response and signal cascade is formed. Like the insulin receptors, EAGF receptors, and PDGF receptors, insulin will agonist increase the response, and imidazumab and tarazumab are the HER2 agonist, and they have moderate response. Intracellular receptor is the last type of the receptor which produce ligand-soluble ligands enter the cell. They bind to the nuclear receptor and then act on the DNA. It will decrease the formation of the DNA since it will decrease, and response will be limited or decreased. And so they act on the DNA, like the steroid receptors, thyroid receptors, and vitamin D. Examples are the hydrocortisone, levothyroxine, and the tamoxifen. Slow receptors. These are the slow receptors. So these are the type of the receptors which are produced. And the fourth is the signal transduction. What is the signal transduction? Is the process in which drug when enter into the body, it will interact to the receptor and it will form the signal receptor drug complex, and then will produce the response. Like when the drug into the body, the first step, and then receptor will activate, it will produce a response, and it activate the G protein couple receptor, for example. And when G protein couple activation, and it will affect activation, secondary messenger will activate like the CMP, CGMP, IP3, and TAG, and calcium. What are these things? CMP is activation of the phosphokinases, which increase the gluconeogenesis, and heart rate will increase, and other things will increase. CGMP activate the phosphokinase vasodilation and decrease the platelet aggregation. And IP3 is activated when it is activated, it will increase the calcium from the endoplasmic reticulum store. And DHE activate the phosphokinases enzymes, and gene will express. And calcium, when activated directly, it will what is cause it cause the uh, calcium will cause the muscle contraction and secretion. So this is what about the signal. These are the main things which are secondary messenger, and then this secondary messenger will activate the protein kinases, and protein kinases will cause the phosphorylation of the target protein, like the enzyme, channel, and transcription factor. T will be phosphorylated, mean a phosphate group is attached to them, and these phosphate group will then generate a response. So what is the response should be normal, and it could be amplifying of the signal. One activated receptors can activate the many G protein, and one G protein can activate the many enzymes, and each enzyme produce many molecule of the secondary messenger. Huge response will be generated. So if the two or more enzyme will two or more drugs will combine, they could produce a amplify response than the normal response. The next thing is dose response relationship that we are going to study. And what is the effect of dose? Mean the relationship between the dose and the concentration of the drug and magnitude of response what it produces. First is grade dose response. It is the individual dose, mean individual response. When we give a drug, what is the response of that drug on that individual person is known as grade dose response, and it is the continuous response. By this response, if we draw a graph between the dose and response, then we get a sigmoid curve, and the E50 is the maximum response that a drug can produce 50%. What is strength? Basically we are mean by it. The second is quantile dose response. Quantile dose response is the second type in which all or none response is seen, mean we see the response on the whole population, not a single thing, we not single person, we see the response on the whole population. What is the response on that? And then what are the, so there are some terms like the ED50, which are man, and TD50, LD50. What is the ED50? ED50 is the dose producing 50% of the maximum effect. Mean when the dose is producing the 50% of the maximum effect, it is known as ED50. TD50 is dose producing toxic effect and 50%. Mean half of the toxic effect it has produced, it is known as TD50. And LD50 is the dose lethal to the 50% of the population. It is the main things which you have to remember. And then the therapeutic index, that is the formula which TI therapeutic index, even TD50 divided by 80/50. And when there is high therapeutic effect index, it's mean that it's a safer drug. When the therapeutic index is low, then the drug is very harmful. So next concept is about the potency and efficacy. What is the potency? Potency is the dose required to produce a given effect. Like the decrease ED50 will increase the potency. How it happen? Mean if you have the strength, what is the potency? Potency is the strength of drug to reach the 50% of the response. Okay, when you have less strength and you can achieve the 50%, it means the drug is more potent. And if you have more strength and the drug reached at the 50% and take very much time, it means that the drug is less potent. Okay. And next thing is efficacy. Efficacy is the maximum response that can a drug produce. Okay. When we are talking about the potency, we will see the curve horizontally, and when we're talking about the efficacy, we will see the drug's height. We will see the response height. Mean in this graph, we will see the response and dose. And when there are three drugs, for example, one is the red, and second is the blue, and the third is green. These three drugs will produce the effect on the drug, and the curve is obtained when the first drug that has the high potency, the second is less, and the third is least potent drug. And in case of efficacy, there should be the graph, not like that. Okay. The next thing is intrinsic activity. What is the intrinsic activity? Intrinsic activity is uh, ability of drug receptor complex to produce a response after binding. When a drug is bind to the receptor, what kind of response it show? So that is the intrinsic activity. We can say it alpha, efficacy of the drug over the efficacy of all the agonist. So alpha of the full agonist equal to 1. When the intrinsic activity is 1, then it means that the full agonist. So what is the concept of agonist and antagonist and partial agonist and inverse agonist? So we are going to study that. First is full agonist. Full agonist mean a drug when bind to the receptor, it generates the full response and increase the activity. Partial agonist mean when a drug bind and it not produce the maximum effect but half of effect. Somehow the effect is produced. And inverse agonist is the effect of the body effect of the drug when act on the receptor. It produces the effect but inversely, not in favor of the drug but less. Okay, so when we are talking about a full agonist, it will produce the maximum effect. When we partial agonist, it will produce the submax effect, mean not maximum. Inverse effect will decrease the basal activity, mean the effect will decrease. And the next is a competitive agonist. Competitive agonist, well, no response on the effect or response is not, but block the agonist. That agonist, which is a drug, for example, and it will block that agonist, and the response will not show. The second is non-competitive agonist. Non-competitive agonist, what happens when it binds to the drug, the response will no response, and it will reduce the Emax, mean that the maximum response will be decreased. Okay, and antagonist, what antagonist do when it bind, then it will have the zero intrinsic activity. Mean it can also call this as neutral. No response, no change in the basal activity, mean the no effect will show. Last thing is we are going to discuss the factors which are factors affecting the drug response. First is age. Neonates and elder agents are sensitive to the many drugs. Weight, dosing often depend upon the weight. We also measure the weight before giving the dose. That is the and the formula of dosing. We have to calculate the weight. And sex, mean hormonal differentiation between the woman and man will also affect the dose. Next is genetics. If the genetics is strong, the drug will act otherwise, and if the genetic is not very much strong, then the drug act on the other strategy. So genetic also a main factor. Next is disease. Like if you have renal disease, cardiac disease, and a hepatic disease, the drug will not absorb and the drug will not excrete, so it can also cause toxicity in the body and can cause the organ failure and many other complications. Next is the route. Bioavailability varies with the route. Bioavailability, what was the bioavailability? Mean the how much drug is available in the blood for giving the response. So it can also be decreased when you have the complications of the organ. Next thing is tolerant. mean how much you can, if you give a drug again and again, it will reduce the tolerance and the drug response will decrease. Repeated use of the drug will decrease the response, and that is known as tolerance. And drug interaction mean when two drugs combine, their effect will increase. That is known as synergism. And when two drug combine, when two same drug combine, they will be competitive of each other, and the response will decrease. So that is known as synergism. Okay. So in the whole chapter we have studied about the pharmacodynamic. First of all, we understand what are the pharmacodynamic, then we study what are the drug receptors, and then type of the receptor, then the signal transduction, and then the dose response relationship, then intrinsic activity, and at last what are the factors that affect the intrinsic activity. So that is the chapter. I hope you understand, and we will meet in the next chapter, and subscribe.